And we are live. Hello, everyone. And thank you for coming. I don't know what that was, but I'm really sorry for that technical issue. Let's hope that doesn't happen again. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes.
Um, does someone have their phone? Do you have your phone on? Okay, I'm going to try this again. Thank you, audience, very much for sticking with us while we get through these first initial technical little issues that looks like we're having. My name is Corey. I'm with Vroman's Bookstore, and tonight I have the pleasure of hosting Ryan Hampton discussing his new book, Unsettled, with Gerald Posner. I also want to shout out and thank you to the people of C-SPAN and Book TV. Thank you very much for joining us as well. Before we get started, there is a purchase book button down here at the bottom of your screen. If you have yet so sorry.
It might work better.
If you have yet I'm sorry, Ryan. If you've yet to purchase your book, please do so by entering that purchase book button. Also, if you have a question for tonight, there is another tab at the bottom of your screen. It says Ask a Question. Please put your question there so we can get to them all. Let me introduce our guest. Gerald Posner is the author of 13 acclaimed books, including the New York Times nonfiction bestsellers Case Closed, Why America Slept, and God's Bankers, along with his most recent book, Pharma. He, he has been a freelance writer for many news magazines and a regular contributor to NBC, the History Channel, CNN, Fox News, CBS, and MSNBC. Ryan Hampton travels coast to coast to add solutions to our national addiction crisis. He has content that reaches millions each month. Ryan breaks down the cultural barriers that we have kept people suffering in silence, and is inspiring a new generation of people recovering out loud through his Voices project. He is a prominent advocate, a marvelous speaker, a media commentator, and the author of American Fix and his latest, The Unsettled. I'm going to hand it over to these gentlemen.
Can you hear me? Ryan?
It's going in and out.
Yeah.
There, I think.
Ryan,
Yes,
can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, Gerald, can you hear me? Gerald, why don't you refresh your browser?
Thanks everybody for joining. We'll get started in a second. Sorry, tech difficulties. Gerald, I think you're on mute.
Gerald, do you have microphones, headphones, a headset?
Yeah, we do.
Maybe that'll work.
Is that better? Nope. Same.
Oh, man. Hi, everybody. I just didn't want you to see a black screen. We are having some technical issues with the audio. Please bear with us, and we'll be right with you. I pulled you back in. I thought maybe they could see you instead of just me.
Yes. Hey everybody, thanks for jumping on. Gerald's just getting some headphones and logging in from a different computer, but it's good to see everybody. I see Ellen and Maureen and Ed and Jessica and Kim and Cynthia, and I know Barbara and Michael. There's a bunch of others that are on, so just stand by. This is the world we live in today, right? Sadly, we were virtual, and we'll get started in a few minutes.
Ryan, where are you at currently?
Las Vegas. I am home in Las Vegas, trying to decompress a little bit from a pretty stressful week this week with the book launch and everything, coming at us. So we're excited to get started soon, hopefully.
How has the book launch been, besides stressful?
Phenomenal. It's really good. The response has been great. Is that Gerald?
I think so.
Great.
And I switched to a different computer.
Well, sometimes there'll be feedback with the mic, but I've not had this problem.
I've never seen this happen. Why did you say that? It's never happened before.
The audio's working.
So,
Audio's good now?
Audio's great.
And
I'm going to toggle out.
Your audio is great, Gerald.
the great thing is, Ryan, when we had got together for 15 minutes, we were okay. Right?
Now I can't see you though. I see. There you are.
All right. So I know that the Sattlers and a lot of other people have wanted you to be silent, but I didn't know that they would get the benefit of getting the first 6 or 7 or 8 minutes of this tonight. Let's get right into it. I am, aside from having those problems, very, very excited to be here with you because your book is a spectacular book. It's riveting in its account. It's important. Everybody who has followed this as a journalist, and I've talked to a lot of journalists, learned something from your book. We saw the inside of the way that the bankruptcy system works and why the victims were not getting any justice in this. So let's get right into it. You're sort of have a reputation as an activist. You have an author. You did American Fix, and we're talking about a creditors committee of 9 members that typically has all types of big time creditors, lobbyists, money specialists, and everything that want a seat on that. How was it that you got one of those 9 seats?
Right. I mean, it's a great question, and people have been asking me that all week. Most folks didn't even know that there was a thing such as a creditors committee, or what an unsecured creditors committee was in the bankruptcy. Like you mentioned, prior to joining the UCC, which is the acronym for the Unsecured Creditors Committee, in September of 2019, along with many of our viewers who are here with us today, I was side by side with them. Really fighting Purdue, fighting the Sacklers, advocating for solutions in my community and around the country, working as best as I could or knew how at the time to hold Purdue accountable. And when the news broke in September 2019 that Purdue was filing for bankruptcy, I think, along with many others, thought, well, maybe there might be a shred of accountability that comes out of this. The company is going to no longer exist in its current form. The Sacklers aren't going to own it. They're going to have to pay a bunch of money. The money's going to go to the right places, hopefully. And was wondering if there was a way to be involved. I had been in discussion with attorneys, plaintiff attorneys, for some time, for several months, about the possibility of some sort of, massive class action against either Purdue or the Sacklers. And it was made known to me shortly after they filed for bankruptcy that there was kind of this very little known committee that happened to have extraordinary power called the UCC. And to get on it, you had to apply. You had to fill out a form and state why or how you believe you had been harmed by the company, and submit it to the United States trustee at SDNY in New York. And eventually interview if you were asked to interview. So I filled out this long form application, sent a letter. There were members of Congress that I took it as like a job interview, right? Like I had members of Congress that I had worked with on opioid legislation who wrote letters on my behalf. And much to my surprise, I was invited by Paul Schwartzberg, the United States trustee, to New York for a committee seating meeting. In 2 weeks after Purdue filed for bankruptcy. And I found myself in this room with all these people I had squared off with for years. I mean, representatives of big insurance companies, other pharmaceutical companies, pharmacies, right? Lobbyists, and several victims who had applied to be on this committee, and interviewed. It was a 6 hour day of interviews and a lot of waiting. And the U.S. trustee came down at the end of that evening and announced a 9-member committee that couldn't be appealed or changed, that he would seat in the bankruptcy. And I believe I was the 7th name, right, that was read. And I was a little taken back, and I was seated with Cheryl Jouer, who is a victim herself and has now lost 2 sons to an overdose. And I didn't know much about the Unsecured Creditors Committee, even still that day. I just knew that it was a powerful committee, and they would have a big say, possibly, in what would happen and what was that night from different lawyers and people who were also on the committee, who were kind of trying to rub my ego and say, oh, this is, the victims are going to get so much done here. There were 4 victims that were seated, and you all are going to have such a powerful voice. And this committee, it did have broad powers, right? It had the power to subpoena, it had the power to go for discovery. You could, if you would think of the bankruptcy as such of like a, plaintiff and defendant, you could think of the UCC as like a mega plaintiff. It had a fiduciary duty to over 600,000 creditors that included states and municipalities, corporations, government creditors, and the pharmacy creditors. It was pretty much everyone. But I was unprepared for what was going to happen.
And before we get into the substance of what happened, I want to ask you a question. You were already writing a book before you actually got on the UCC. You were looking at sort of a second book coming up to follow American Fix. People in the bankruptcy process and some of the attorneys knew you were writing a book. And yet today, the fact that you have really delivered the goods is that they are in a fury. Everybody is now screaming, "Oh my God, Ryan wrote a book." Tell me a little bit about the agreement you had to sign for confidentiality and how now there's an effort by the lawyers in some way to intimidate or silence you through the legal system.
Right. Great question. So I had wanted to write a second book prior to entering the UCC, and I actually wanted to write a book about Purdue and more notably about the Sackler family. And so when I entered the UCC, I was pretty clear, about a month in, hey, I'm kind of working on the idea for this book. It's going to be about the Sackler family. And actually the original title of it under my contract with what is my publisher at the time was Sacked, SACKED. That was going to be the name of the book, Sacked, about the first family of Big Pharma. And sometime around spring of 2020, and you can, if you read Unsettled, you'll see where the split takes place, right? Like the first third of the book is very much in depth about the Sackler family, about the company, because that was originally the Sacked part. But sometime around spring of 2020, something shifted in me. And it was, oh my goodness, the story here isn't the Sackler family, and it's not even Purdue. It's this process that I'm experiencing. It's what I would go to almost say corruption, levels of corruption and injustice, and kind of this good old boys network of attorneys, and what the state attorneys general and the federal government is telling people in front of, the cameras and with a microphone versus what's happening behind closed doors. And this extraordinary effort to keep money as far away from victims and far away from any system that is not 100% controlled by the government already, including charitable nonprofits who are on the front lines of the overdose crisis. I said, this is bizarre. I've never seen anything like it. And that's when there was this shift that happened. Now, fast forward to, last month, right? Folks knew I was writing this book. They didn't know what it was about. They didn't know what was in it. And I was very intentional about that because I knew a lot of people wouldn't be happy with what I had to say, but I also felt I had a constitutional right to say what I needed to say in opinion, and also a right to disclose some of this stuff, being that this is supposed to be the most transparent process, in the words of Marshall Huebner, right, the chief lawyer for Purdue, in the history of the world. I'm sure many people, anybody who listened to the hearings would always hear that from Marshall. And I resigned the committee the night before the confirmation over a dispute that I had around the appeal. There was an impending appeal that was going to be coming. I was uncertain how I felt about the appeal, right? But I also felt that an appeal process might be the most healthy thing that happens here, if for anything else, to add a layer of judicial review and examination of the plan in itself that didn't exist. So the night before, or a couple days before the confirmation, the weekend before, I receive a letter that was written by Davis Polk, Purdue's counsel, saying, we want the victim creditors and the creditors committee and the state attorneys general who have signed on to this settlement to sign this letter and put your name to it, urging the Department of Justice not to appeal the plan. But there's a footnote. We don't want to be a part of the letter, and we don't want them to know that we had our fingerprints on the letter, and we think it would be bad if DOJ thought we had anything to do with this. And this was communicated to me, and I was like, that was just it for me. That was the end. I was like, I'm not participating in this, not getting involved. Huge dispute, resigned the committee over it. And as soon as I resigned, within a couple of weeks, I get this letter from my former committee counsel at Aiken Gump, basically saying that if there's anything in the book that I write that could disrupt the settlement, if there's anything that I say in the media that could disrupt the settlement, if I break any mediation privilege about how the settlement came about, or if I break any confidentiality around the protective order with willful intention, they kept using, that I could be liable in, and this is a quote, in the millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or even billions of dollars to the entire opioid claimant body, which in simple language means I, Ryan Hampton, would take on the responsibility of the settlement made with creditors myself. I have never heard, you're a lawyer, you know better than me. I've never heard of anything more absurd in my life.
It's preposterous. It's the only intent of that letter is to intimidate you, to make you back off. And it also is the best indication that you hit a nerve. You came out, you've explained what happened, and by laying out the facts, everybody was in a fury. You also, by the way, are giving away the proceeds to this to charity.
Right.
So it's an additional factor. It's very interesting. What you're concerned about is coming out with the information and the truth. And you mentioned this a moment ago, how your view of it changed. You know, you started out with the view that I think you had an activist, and a lot of us had, that Purdue and the active Sackler family members were the sort of only villains on this. But over time, that in the bankruptcy process, your view shifted a little bit. It's more complicated. And you mentioned the state attorney generals, that so many of us in the beginning, especially the proactive ones who were really chasing Purdue, thought they're going to get a good settlement for everybody. But we forgot something for a while, even those of us who were attorneys, and that is state attorney generals aren't representing the victims, they're representing the state. Tell us a little bit about that and what you discovered.
Yeah, it was actually a really heartbreaking discovery for me, and it took a toll on me. I was in Massachusetts just a few months before joining the committee at the first hearing that the state of Massachusetts under Attorney General Healy had with the Sacklers. I was out there with Nan, Nan Golden, for those of you who know her, and Cheryl was there, and team sharing, and we had the megaphones and we were rallying the troops and doing what we do. And I always thought it was us versus them, and us being attorneys general, victims, kind of on the same page. And before I go any further, I do want to just give credit to where credit's due. I would say we probably wouldn't have gotten to where we got with going after the Sacklers and ripping apart Purdue to the pieces that at least today it is without the state of Massachusetts, right? State of Massachusetts led the way. And I think we were all in lockstep around that, but things change, right? Things change very quickly when money's on the table. And I experienced that for the first time around something called the Emergency Relief Fund. This was really my pet project from day one of the bankruptcy. I felt, as so did the victim creditors of the committee, that it was a crime in itself that so much money would be paid to consultants and lawyers and professionals in the case. I mean, we're talking now in October 2021, we're nearing, if not past, $1 billion already, just to lawyers and professionals, under 1,000 of them, or less than 1,000 of them. I thought it would be a shame that money isn't on the ground. Overdose numbers were going up. We were in the midst, we were right at the beginning of the pandemic in spring of 2020. People were dying, and we had proposed $200 million off the balance sheet that would come out of Purdue, that Purdue would authorize to go into an independent 501c3 charity, right, that they would not control. It would have equal representation on the board of directors between creditors, victim creditors, Purdue, state attorneys general from both the consenting and non-consenting states. We had to remember, it really irked me that Purdue had to be a part of the board, but it was still their money, right? So there was no way around that. But we proposed this system that was pretty equal, but that the money would go to non-governmental nonprofits that were not already flush with cash through state agencies, right? And I thought this was a no-brainer. I was like, $200 million, the way we had built it, it would have gone to harm reduction, syringe exchange services, fentanyl test strips. As we know, we were right in the beginning, in the middle actually of a massive fentanyl poison drug supply, recovery support services, transportation for people to treatment and linkages to treatment that they could use on public assistance or Medicaid, support for grieving families that were still dealing with loved ones who were struggling. It would have been the largest investment, according to Daniel Raymond, formerly the policy director of the Harm Reduction Coalition, in the harm reduction infrastructure in the history of the United States. It would have been the largest single investment into recovery community organizations in the history of the United States. So I was excited about that. And we proposed it. We took it to the states. We negotiated with the states over a course of about 6 months. Eventually made our way, all of us, to Davis Polk's boardroom in late February 2020. And ultimately, the states killed it. They killed it because they saw it as a hole in their settlement, as they would say. Deputy Attorney General, I see we have some folks on here from Florida, and I name check him in the book, and I'll name check him here at this book event. Deputy Attorney General John Gard of the state of Florida, under Attorney General Ashley Moody's office, single-handedly killed that emergency relief fund. He killed it because he did not believe that the money would be better spent with these nonprofits than it would within state infrastructure. Now, remember, the states wouldn't even tell us how they were going to spend it. They just wanted the money, and they were going to figure out how to spend it based on their best practices. And they disagreed with us, actually, when we proposed this on using data that was developed from the United States Department of Health and Human Services and the United States Surgeon General. We proposed the services based on that information. To just tell you how adversarial it got, we had the HHS show up with SDNY to tell the Southern District of New York to tell us that they disagreed with their own data on how to spend this money. And it had nothing to do with that. It had to do with the fact that if they didn't have control of all of it, there would be nothing for anybody. That's when I realized we were up against something way bigger than Purdue and way bigger than the Sacklers. But you're on mute. Can't hear you yet, Gerald. There you are.
I'm trying to figure it out on my end.
Oh, okay.
It looks like your mic is toggled, Gerald. At the top of your screen, Gerald, can you hear me? At the top of your screen, you have a little panel, and it shows you what your mic is. Try to untoggle your mic.
Press the little mic button. Try pressing that. See, no.
So you have, Gerald, on the bottom of your screen, there's a little mic with a slash through it. Sorry, Gerald. At the bottom of your screen, there's a little white microphone with a slash on it. Do you see that? We're going to have to refresh you I'm sorry, can you refresh your browser? I'm sorry, everybody, for the difficulty.
We will be right back. While we wait for Gerald, I'll say to Maureen, she says here, yep, Florida law enforcement in charge of a public health crisis. Nothing could be more frustrating, Maureen. I think that was probably one of the largest conflicts that we had. Is you had all of these attorneys who were divvying up dollars and figuring out how to abate a public health crisis, which just seemed completely contrary to what the intent of what we were trying to do. Mixing attorneys and attorneys general and law enforcement with public health has not worked really well for us in the past, and I'm not sure why they thought it would work well in this situation. And even more maddening than that was they had people with lived experience, family members, advocates, and real public health advocates who wanted to be a part of the solution, and they were told that these attorneys general told those folks that they don't matter.
Gerald's coming back.
You're back. I can hear
Are we
you.
back?
Back. Can you hear?
No, we have the. Gerald, do you have any other computers or anything open
I
in the
can't
house?
hear Ryan.
I'm here.
Gerald, can you hear me?
Ryan,
I'm here.
back? All right.
I'm back.
Sorry about that. I think that you were just finishing up about the fact we were talking about states attorney generals, and I wanted to ask a question about it.
Mhm.
The final judgment, what the plan is for approval, the $8 to $10 billion, 92.5% of it, as you point out in your book, ends up going to the states, 7.5% to victims.
Right.
There was one stage, and you cite this in the book, in which an assistant deputy attorney general said the victims did this to themselves. Do you think there was sort of not a bias, but a prejudgment, the fact that the victims were judged by the states as not being in the same category, as deserving of a full share of the judgment?
Yeah, another good question and another large frustration. You'll know that many of us who are victims of Purdue's greed and have survived overdoses and do this work on the ground in families, we deal with that side eye kind of all the time from the government. But it was really clear in these negotiations. You're right. So another person that I name check in the book, and I'm happy to name check here too, is former Deputy Attorney General of the state of New York, David Nachman, who was the lead negotiator on behalf of the states during mediation. Now, the states made the claim there were 130,000 victims who filed claims, proof of claims in Purdue, right? The the states led under kind of Deputy Attorney General Nachman and another team of other deputy AGs tried to make the claim that their claims should go before victims, because their thinking and their methodology was that the state was the one who bore the cost of the crisis, meaning the state had an administrative claim per se over victims because they were the ones providing the criminal justice costs and the social costs and the healthcare costs and the costs to their Medicaid system, that their claims should be paid out and be paid out more than victims. And really the whole bankruptcy set everybody up in a sense, not to fight Purdue or fight the Sacklers because they were just writing the checks. It set us all up to fight against each other and to make a case of who deserves more. right? And so in that fight for who deserves more, former Deputy Attorney General Nachman made the outrageous claim in the beginning that the starting point for their offer to the victims was $0. And then that moved up to 300 million. And as you know, there were mediators in the case, Lane Phillips and Ken Feinberg, right, who ultimately negotiated with all creditors and most notably the states and the victims a $750 million settlement. Now that's an average of $5,000 per family. It's not that much money. And to put into perspective for people who are like, oh, $5,000 is $5,000. Well, there was a recent bankruptcy involving an auto manufacturer over seatbelts, right? And the seatbelt company had to go into bankruptcy. And the payout for a bruise from the seatbelt was more than what you would receive if you lost your child to Oxycontin in Purdue Pharma, right? I mean, it's just egregious. It makes no sense.
As a matter of fact, you write about this. I mean, the maximum that somebody could get would be $48,000, right? But in order to do that, you've shown the hurdles that are required in terms of producing receipts for every prescription filled, years and years and years ago. It's not just a matter of saying, yes, I'm filing for this. It's very difficult to be able to prove and it makes it even more difficult. It's almost as though the victims are victimized another time by having to go through that.
Doubly victimized. And there's a couple of really maddening points about this. So first and foremost, the victims were held to a higher standard, a much higher bar than the states and the government were. So there was a formula that the states came up with, and they actually gave it a really interesting name. They called it the Trillionaire. Okay. It was basically where the states would input a bunch of data into this formula that was developed from some university professors, and it would, spit out a number, that says, okay, well, the estimated economic damage combined is XYZ. That number came to over $2 trillion, right? Now, the states were able to make a claim, though, in Purdue and use as their number to negotiate their eventual settlement under the hypothesis that Purdue was the taproot of the entire overdose crisis. Now, I'm not arguing with that. What I'm saying, though, is the states were allowed to say, hey, we're going to file a claim based on the entire cost of the overdose crisis and blame it on Purdue. But they were not required in this court or this venue to prove any of it. They didn't have to draw a direct line between that $2 trillion and Purdue. They were able just to issue an amount and say, we're sovereigns, we know what we're saying, and this is the number, and we're going to negotiate based on that number. Now, for victims, I file a claim, or Ellen, or Randy, or Maureen, or all the folks who are joining us tonight file a claim. We have to prove that Purdue was the beginning of the causation of the harm. So I would have to go back and find pharmacy records, prescriptions, treatment records, hospital records, and then draw a straight line to argue my claim. The problem with that, though, is that where I was in the state of Florida, right? And because I tried to get my records, and this was from 10, 12 years ago, state of Florida laws only require pharmacies to hold on to records like that in most cases for 5 years. After 5 years, and get rid of them. A lot of my prescriptions were filled within the doctor's offices of these pill mills that no longer exist. And some of these doctors aren't even alive anymore. So the burden of proving that, and for someone who lost a loved one, right? And I know a lot of people listening tonight went through this. They didn't even know where to start. They didn't know what hospitals their loved one had been at. They didn't know what doctors they went to. They didn't know what pharmacies they went to. So the burden, it was different. We were treated differently. It was not an equitable process. The ultimate payout, though, is a paltry sum, to say the least. And it's not even like we say 48,000 scaling down to $3,500. What people don't realize, though, is that amount's going to be paid out over time. You're not going to get one check, and that amount is before, the haircut that's going to come. Most of these cases, there's going to be a contingency taken out of 30 to 40% in some cases. So that number may be 30 to 40% less. So was this really worth it? Like, what did we really accomplish here other than little money for victims, a lot of money for the government, which is sitting on dollars that have yet to be spent to abate the opioid crisis, right? And the Sacklers walking away. Like, what did we accomplish here?
Yeah, and there's some things on that. You pointed this out before, and that is that the Sacklers, with the billions that they have left over the 9 years that they will pay into this with their regular investment and return on money, they may have more money in 9 years than they have today. So we've left them very, very whole. Yeah,
they will. The estimates show they could be upwards of $16 billion by the time the 9-year settlement is over. They could have paid back themselves from the settlement, still been in the net $1 billion.
Right. So for them, it's a win in that sense. But here are two things that I do want you to comment about. One, the states are putting all of this money that they're getting toward abatement, except half of the states just about really don't have any rules in place to stop them from using it in a general fund. So talk a little bit about that. But the other thing is, shouldn't the states really be funding this themselves? Abatement programs should be the result of taxpayer-funded programs. Why? What they're really doing is not using the taxpayer money, but they're using instead the settlement money. Talk a little bit about that.
Right. This whole opioid litigation got highly political, and I said this the other night, and I'll continue to say it. Every attorney general wakes up in the morning, looks in the mirror, and they see a governor. Some of the attorneys general who were arguing very loud in this case are running for governor. Like, we know that it is happening. I pay tax dollars as an American taxpayer and a taxpayer in my state for these services. We have people way smarter than me who have, who run the numbers that say, if we're going to make a dent in the overdose crisis, we need to look upwards of $20 to $30 billion investment, right, towards evidence-based solutions and community-based solutions. We're nowhere near scratching the surface of that. In fact, the combined cash total of the Purdue settlement and the MDL settlement will likely be under $30 billion cash settlement, right? And that's going to be spread out between the two. It could go up, Purdue 9 years, and the MDL, it could go anywhere from 15 to 17 years, like divided by 50 states. Like, it's not that much money. So I have feared throughout this process that there has been so much attention on the litigation and the money coming from it that we've lost the view, the larger view, that we need to be demanding more and from other revenue sources. Look, the federal government and state governments, if they wanted to, if they made this a priority, could spend $20 to $30 billion on this. I would say, look, I will not argue with what we did with COVID, because COVID is real. That's how you deal with a public health crisis, right? That's how you deal with it. That sizable, massive investment, which is, better than me, but over $1 trillion or something, right? Like, printing money overnight, right? Going into debt, figuring it out. Like, we know that they can do it. Well, we have another declared public health crisis in this country, and it's overdose deaths. Yet we're only a public health crisis in terms of like a declaration or a proclamation, right? There's no real money attached to it. So the states, look, God bless them. Do they deserve a piece of this settlement? Yes. But do they deserve the whole settlement at the expense of the only shred of justice that victims will have? Because let's not forget that in the multi-district litigation, victims have no venue to participate there. It is only government that's eating up those dollars. In Purdue, they have a chance to recover some money, right? And in both cases, the pharmaceutical companies and those most responsible are going to walk away with releases, which means nobody could sue moving forward. So should the government eat up the little bit of money that victims have to put some sort of end to this madness? Absolutely not. And I'll give a really quick comparison. If this was any other issue, and this is what made me so angry, if this was a chemical spill, if this was an oil spill, if this was a fire, if this was some major product malfunction and 130,000 people died as a result of it in a city. I'll use Boston, Massachusetts. 130,000 people wiped off the face of the planet in Boston. Do you think that Attorney General Healy or any other Attorney General would show up in court and say, we want nearly 93% of the money to address future harm to make sure it doesn't happen again to other families? But those 130,000 people who lost their lives, that's, they'll be fine because we're gonna keep it from happening again. No, it's because it's addiction. It's because they see us as addicts. It's because they see us as less than. It's because as they see us as Deputy Attorney General David Nachman said, we did this to ourselves. That's why we didn't really have any meaningful justice here.
And do you think that it's clear from reading your book, as I see it, you think there was almost a wink and a nod between the state attorney generals and eventually not bringing criminal charges, in the sense that the term sheet from the Sacklers, Purdue first talked about in the beginning of this case that they wanted civil, freedom from any civil litigation. The idea was, if we get enough money, we're not going to have an investigation and bring criminal charges. You think that was the unsaid deal?
Yes, I mean I have no qualms about that or doubts. I mean, that was the kind of the tacit wink, wink, nod, nod. There's also evidence to point to the fact of that. You could go back and look probably in the last 10, 15 years and see where a state or a group of states have taken on a mega corporation or individual and settled with them civilly for a sizable amount, and see where there's been a criminal charge that accompanied it. Didn't happen. And I think the evidence is in front of us also. If the United States Department of Justice was going to press charges, they would have pressed charges. These 48 attorneys general that are screaming from the rooftops about how awful Purdue is and the Sacklers are, have the police powers to charge them criminally and to indict them. No Sackler has ever sat before a grand jury. No Sackler has ever been indicted, because it's not about real justice. It's about money. That's the problem here.
And as you said, Ryan, no Sackler was even deposed by a state attorney general during this process.
Well, they were deposed. So they were deposed by
previously, but not as part of in bankruptcy.
Well, in the bankruptcy, they weren't deposed by the agreeing side of the attorneys general. So like the ones who had already signed on to the settlement, because there was that split between consenting and non-consenting, and the UCC deposed. And that was a fascinating process, to say the least. But the consenting states only participated. They did not actually depose because they already knew what they wanted. They already had a term sheet on the table that was pre-negotiated. That was one of the, and I haven't said this enough, that was one of the most damaging things to this entire process. A pre-negotiated term sheet before they even entered bankruptcy was exactly what screwed the victims the most. Having a pre-negotiated term sheet with the Sacklers and the company as to how this was going to go down before it even went into court was just, that set the table for the entire process.
As you're saying this, I must say the bankruptcy is an obtuse and sort of opaque process for most people. They don't understand it. And you have left this after having served on the committee with this sense of rage and anger and disappointment. And it comes through in your book, and it makes those of us who read it feel the same. It's just so powerful. And I really say this to people who haven't read the book. You will understand what took place and you won't be happy about it, but you really are very, very clear. One last thing before we get to some questions from people. There's a moment that's quite dramatic in which you were going to be sitting in a room with David Sackler. It was originally going to be other Sacklers, but then COVID made it virtual. But tell us about being the first time an activist, somebody who's in your position, met or watched and talked to and interviewed and questioned a member of the Klan.
It's interesting. They call them, and even seeing in the internal memos between them, they actually even refer to themselves as the family. It's creepy. That's how they talk about themselves. And it was, I was very nervous going into it. I was originally had asked for a meeting with Richard Sackler, and was told, no way, that's not going to happen. And then was offered Jonathan Sackler, and Jonathan died right before we were supposed to have the meeting. And then it ended up landing with David. And I had really, gotten worked up for this meeting. And I was going to go in and tell him why we needed more money, which I did. Share my story. I brought pictures of friends of mine and some of my friends' kids who died that year. Shared a bit with him about my story. But I thought going into it, maybe there might be some sort of catharsis coming out of it. It was not a cathartic experience at all. We actually ended up arguing the latter part of the meeting, and then the meeting ended. What I experienced, though, was extraordinary privilege, where I should have been in a position to demand more. I was really put in a position where I was being told once again that the Sackler family didn't have it. Like, I literally sat there and heard from David Sackler that there wasn't a penny more than $3 billion, and that if it came to more money, that the Sackler family was actually willing to take this into court because they felt they had a case. They felt they could win. I came out of it feeling that this family was disturbed mentally, actually. I believe that they believe that they may not have done as much wrong as we now know they have. They have convinced themselves that they may be some sort of martyr in the overdose crisis. But it was really, to sum it up, what unchecked power and privilege is in the United States. Like, here was this person who clearly had committed these crimes, this family that had created so much death and destruction, that we almost got to a point where I was like, there is no point in arguing with you anymore, because you're going to win no matter what. The way this system is built, it favors you. It does not favor me. It is designed for people just like David and Richard Sackler.
It's billionaire justice as it goes, with tens of millions of dollars in legal fees. You point out something interesting. David Sackler isn't just saying that. He's not just defending it and knowing it's a lie. He's convinced himself in some sense of denial that they really weren't that terrible. But you also think there were splits in the family. There's no question. We view them as a unified group. I say all the time, I'm guilty of this. I say the Sackler family is, they're all the same, but there were definitely differences.
Yeah, famously, side A and side B, right? So side B being the Raymond side of the family, and side A being the Mortimer side of the family. The Raymond side being Richard and David, and the Mortimer being Mortimer, DA, and his siblings. And if you wanted to think of on a level of evil, which is how I look at it, you'd say side B is the super evil side of the family. And side A is the side of the family. They're still evil, but they just live off the super evil money. Does that make sense? And
that's the best description I've heard of it.
Yeah. It's you could almost it's almost like a cartoon, they spend side A spends side B's money. Side B hoards the money, but they're the ones that are the masterminds,
And you also came across an email that showed one Sackler family member had their own OxyContin problem.
Yeah, this was a fascinating moment for me, because the Sackler family had always maintained, and I had asked these questions, and I even asked David, do you know anybody that struggled with your own product? Do you know anybody who struggled with opioids? I know other reporters have asked, and when Jonathan died, was Jonathan on OxyContin? It was always this very big protected secret. And usually the answer was no. They didn't say, I don't know, or we're not answering it. They actually blatantly said no. And I stumbled on this email in Discovery between Beth Sackler, which was at the time Richard Sackler's ex-wife, David and Mariana Sackler's mother, an email to Richard in 2017 talking about how her mother was struggling with OxyContin and how they were going to control her pain, that she felt like she was going crazy. And it showed that even in 2017, they knew there was some issues with the product, and they were worried about their own family members using it and what they were going to do, right? And for some reason that just felt off to me a bit. And then I learned, I think one of the more other fascinating moments was learning that David struggled with alcoholism, right? David or alcohol, problem drinking. I guess I could say strike alcoholism, but problem drinking. David struggled with problem drinking and gambling. Not a big surprise, but the fact that the Sackler family had their own set of issues around potential substance use disorder, and then the way that they treated us and the way that they characterized us as the abusers and the criminals, and this is our fault. It was eye-opening.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's staggering, actually, even as you go back over it. In the last sort of 10 minutes we have here, Ryan, I'm just going to go to a few questions that being asked from the audience, and it'll be a lightning round for you, although I don't know if they really could take short answers. But somebody's asking here to discuss the document disclosure, the document repository, the state-traded Sackler accountability for this, document repository. But the Sacklers, as non-debtors, really they aren't subject to providing us money of the documents. Are we in for another disappointment down the road?
Very much so. And this was one of the issues that I think some of the attorneys in the case are not happy about me talking about. So one of the big selling points for the confirmation plan was that, again, most transparent process in American history, 30 million documents will be public, depositions will be public. And those are great sound bites, when you're an attorney general or Marshall Huebner, representing Purdue, or a representative of the Sackler family trying to drive this plan through. But the reality is, yes, there will be a document repository. How long is it going to take until we start to see some of these documents? We're supposed to see them soon. I get the feeling that it may be 6 to 8, maybe a year until they get a system set up around it. But these are only Purdue's documents, right? So these are only the documents that Purdue as a company is able to produce. And as a result of the Sacklers being in control of Purdue for some time, yes, Sackler emails are going to be in there, but there's still a huge fight over privilege. Like the Sackler family and Purdue will be able to claim privilege and have some of this stuff withdrawn or redacted. I don't think there's going to be many shockers for people when they see these documents. Still some of the most guarded secrets, though, right? Some of the stuff that should be public, we're not going to see. Like, I don't think people should expect that they're just going to open up, the canon and, the whole puzzle is going to be solved. Some of the Sacklers' most guarded secrets will remain guarded till the end of time.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. I know that in other cases in litigation, that when the companies start to see litigation piling up against them, as the Purdue saw, the directors will sometimes exchange emails on their personal accounts as opposed to doing it through the company. I would be surprised if that was not the case with the Sacklers.
I will add one note, because if there's any aspiring investigative journalists or reporters or writers out there, and this has been a case that I think many, including yourself, Gerald, and Patrick, Rad and Keith, have tried to crack. There's one, and I mention him in the book. There's one really interesting character who held something over 200 positions at Purdue, but also at the same time served as the personal counsel to the Sackler family. And it's a name you probably know of, Stuart Baker. And Mr. Baker was personal counsel for things like, writing the contracts for who the cleaning service was going to be in the Sacklers' personal residences. But he also had really important positions in communications with the Sackler family. It was kind of the go-between a lot of transactions around the, financial and whatnot. I don't want to get too much into trouble here, but the Sacklers are able to claim privilege, attorney-client privilege, around everything with Stuart Baker. And if you thought of like a consigliere of the family, it's Stuart Baker. We'll never see those communications.
No,
and they did that very intentionally.
Yeah, he also served as a director on a number of Mundi Pharmas internationally. I sent several emails to his firm and faxes asking to interview him, and have never received the time of day. And you're not going to break through that. No, you're right. A couple of very quick questions. How did you decide on the great name of the book, Unsettled? Someone asked.
Well, like I said, the original name of the book was Sacked, and as soon as I realized this wasn't going to be really another narrative on the Sackler family, I thought about how did I feel coming out of this, and really to this day, it's unsettling. I feel like this case for the rest of until the end of time will be unsettled. There is nothing settled about this settlement or this bankruptcy. If anything, it has left me feeling unsettled and millions of families and people around this country. So I just thought it was an appropriate, simple name that maybe folks could relate to.
One last one as we just wrap up here. The lawyers, you dealt with a whole team of lawyers. Was there one that in the end aggravated you the most?
Yes. Well, that's how much time do we have left? Listen, there were a lot of them. If I never talk to another lawyer in my life, I'll be happy. Except you, Gerald, because you're a recovering
non-practicing.
Yeah, non-practicing recovering lawyer, right? So right. Yes, Marshall Huebner just annoys. He every spidey sense in my body is on alert whenever he talks. But really on that level, and again, apologies to our friends from Florida who may be watching and joining, but that Deputy Attorney General from the state of Florida, John Gard, is someone who should be ashamed of himself, and that former Deputy Attorney General of New York, because I understand Marshall Huebner had a job to do, and that was represent his client, which was Purdue. So it was okay for me not to like him, but that was his job. But these attorneys general, it was their job, their public duty to represent the public and not have these prejudices and biases against people like me and a lot of the people who are watching. Their job was to do the public good, and I believe they did everything opposite of that. So I really hold much disdain in my heart for them, those two gentlemen specifically.
Well, Ryan, as we're wrapping up, I just want to reiterate, I think that your book is one of the most important books. You cannot have an understanding of what took place in the opioid crisis with Purdue and with the Sacklers unless you read this book. You can read investigative books about Purdue and everything, and you've covered that before. But to understand why we're sitting here today without the victims getting any justice in this, they need to see how you've laid it out. It's an infuriating but absolutely riveting book. And I apologize for the tech problems along the way, which I'm sure that the Sacklers would have loved. But thank you for bearing with it and making such a powerful presentation.
Thank you, Gerald. Appreciate it. And the tech problems, it's just the world we live in. It's fine.
Yeah.
Gerald, you are great, and you're cool as a cucumber.
I always like tech problems when they appear only when we go live.
That's always the best, and I appreciate everybody staying with us and sticking with us through these tech issues. And Gerald, you were wonderful, and I'm so sorry that had happened. But thank you for sticking in there with us, and thank you, Ryan. I want to read your book. I'm someone who doesn't know a lot about all of this, and I am so moved right now. Like, you guys, that was really wonderful, and thank you so much for sharing. And Gerald, thank you for your questions and your input and moderating. This was a wonderful event. I really appreciate it, and I think our audience has too. We've been getting a lot of comments. So thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you all.
For the audience, if you want to purchase a book, you may do so right now with that purchase a book tab at the bottom of your screen. You can also go to vromansbookstore.com and purchase the book there. There will be a replay for those of you who came late, or if you would like to share with a friend, which I'm going to share with everybody I can. So I think that this is a wrap, and thank you very much for for joining us, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Gerald.
Thanks, Ryan. Continued success. Keep getting the word out about what happened.
Thank you. Appreciate everybody. Thank you all.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye, everybody.